Why, hello, everybody. How are you guys doing tonight? Welcome to everyone in Spirits Land, not just Whiskey Land tonight, because we're talking about absinthe this evening. Because, like you just saw, we have our good friend Brian Cushing and Alan Bishop's just running a couple minutes late. He will be here. Apparently, he's having a hard time getting used to not having a job and a clock and showing up on time. That happens. But so we're going to be talking about an absinthe that you guys revived from the past, basically, and put things together. And I absolutely love the entire project. Hold on a second. I don't know. Oh, Facebook was giving us an issue, but that's okay. Everyone watches on YouTube anyway, so it'll be clicking on that later once that resolves its issue and plays out. So before we go any further, we do have a couple shows we have to talk about because we are a proud part of the Bar Cart Co-op. Now, please give me a little bit of leeway here. This is normally Mike's spiel, and I am nowhere going to be near as good as this as he is. But we do have our first show, Distillers Talk, with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. They are kind of the oldest of the pack of people, and they look into all sorts of weird little niches that most people do not. They delve into questions that not everyone gets into because they don't know how to ask them. So you have some really interesting stuff going on there. Then he also has One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, where he will answer your questions. So if you have any unique questions you ever wanted answered, toss them his way. Plus any curveballs, because those are always fun for me to see him try to answer. So you're going to get some wonderful, wonderful, real answers from someone who has worked his way up kind of the way most people are doing that are watching the channel. We also have Mr. Kevin Rose with Bourbon Turntable, who's blending the love of music with the love of whiskey. He has some really great shows coming up. I know there's one that was just put off this week by a day or so. So make sure that one comes out on Thursday. Check that one out. Also, we have Mr. David Levine from the Whiskey Ring podcast. David does wonderful reviews of all sorts of whiskey where we don't delve too much into traditional whiskey and stuff like that. But I was going to say he does a little bit of everything. And not only that, he has some picks that he does that are really, really good. So make sure you check out his channel. Oh, wait, Alan has one more. Jesus Christ. He has enough for his own entertainment system, so he's going to have his own network soon. But if you have ghosts, you have everything, where he steps into the realm of spirits, not just spirits as in distilled spirits, but the spiritual world, where actually you've been doing some really unique stuff the last couple of weeks, Alan. You had the Whiskey Shaman on the other week, and the last 2 or 3, you've been really delving into some other areas, not necessarily spirits distilled related. So I find that a unique and neat sidestep into kind of your personality, if you would, more compared to the other 2 where they're more kind of geared towards industry. That one has more of a sidestep glimpse into things.
Definitely trying to do something different with that for sure. So sorry I'm running behind. Long day, so
it's okay. I know days off are crazy when you're unemployed.
It's also hot as balls in this little room. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, it's probably one of these first days where it kind of warmed up a lot. Like yesterday was that here where you had to open the windows a bit. It's like, well, I haven't been able or had to do that in quite a long time. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been nice.
Here's how redneck I am. I wore a bandana today. I might have been moving equipment. You see this? This is red. This is white. All of this. Looks like I have on war paint or some shit.
Well, we're glad to have both of you here today. And Mitch, happy you're actually back with us this week. Missed you. I was going to say a bit last week, but we're glad to have you back. And Mike will be on the show, running late. He's just same type of issues. Someone's dragging his leg down. So he will be here hopefully momentarily. But I think we can delve into the project that you guys started, where you guys revived in 1830's Absinthe. First off, where did you find an actual recipe in a book, or how did you base off of that? I'm going to go back, but this is one that if no one watched what I asked you to watch, which was the actual documentary, which is what you should watch. So go over there and do that because it was wonderful. I enjoyed it because it stepped into history the way I like to. Not only did you guys delve into it yourselves, but you pulled the people you found information from into the limelight. I was going to say, and sometimes it sounds weird, but that person that may only know a paragraph of information is the one that changed the world.
Yeah.
The world and what's going on.
Yeah. And that was the really fun thing about it, is all the different people we got to draw in and all these bits of expertise that we assembled into this final product. So I think that's what made it really special, is all these different pieces we brought together.
Yeah, I agree. There was no real like discernible recipe that was written down. The only thing that we had to go off of was literally, the time period in which the absinthe was originally made, as well as the fact that they mentioned that wormwood was already growing in Switzerland County, Indiana, likely to be annual wormwood or perhaps mugwort. Definitely wouldn't have been grand wormwood at that time. But that gave us a pretty good understanding of what they were making, because anything that they would have been making that early on would have been either northern France in origin or Val d'Itravers region. So that gives us a pretty good idea of what botanicals would have been in there potentially, as well as having some idea of what botanicals either A, would grow in the local area, or B, that they could potentially import, because even though they were right on the Ohio River, there were a number of botanicals that would have just been far too expensive to really obtain to do anything with. So I think that gave us as good of an idea as anything. We can't say it's an exact recipe because we've never seen an exact recipe, but we used our distiller's intuition and a little bit of bullshit and magic and made it work.
Well, I mean, but when you're trying to fill in the pieces of the past, when you're talking about something that was happening here in America, where it wasn't even fully, I want to say, not developed, but I wasn't like had a real stake at the time in Europe. Like, it was just coming to fruition to see something over here happening at the same time is really interesting, when you're like, well, it's just starting to get exciting. No, it's not. Oh, hold on. I will be back in 1 second. Apparently I didn't plug in my battery and I'm going to get kicked off in a second. So
Gimp is loose.
Yeah, maybe. I gotta go let them out. But this all started when you were working at Locust Grove, right, Brian?
Yes. Yeah.
How did you get pulled into Locust Grove? Because I find that to be kind of like the starting of the entire story. And
wow, that goes back 25 years. I started as a volunteer at Locust Grove in 1999 doing living history, and long story short, I eventually wound up working there, and eventually wound up program director. And I was lucky enough to be the program director when the small farm distillery project, the early 19th century small farm distillery project, got rolling. And I remember hearing about it, before I actually got into that position, and I hadn't seen anything new built at Locust Grove pretty much the whole time I'd been there. So I was like, yeah, if this happens, I'll be retired and I'll be coming back for the party. But we had Sally Van Winkle Campbell on board, Pappy's granddaughter. She was on the board of directors. She headed up the fundraising, quickest, best funded project we ever had. There's still money sitting in that budget, which is amazing. But I luckily I was in the role of working on interpretive programming at the time. I like whiskey. And, I had an idea of what it was and all that, but I don't even know if I'd ever even had a distillery tour at that point, Mm-hmm. But, it wound up I kind of wanted to be in the middle of figuring out what this thing was supposed to be, how it was supposed to work, what we were going to do with it. And Steve Bayshore had us out to Mount Vernon. He's literally the one who taught me, how whiskey is made. which was an amazing experience. And so for me, it's like it was good for me because since I had never been on the modern side, I didn't have any habits to break. It just went straight in. but yeah, and so and there was a lot of great people that were involved in that. Sally, obviously, Dominic Pagano was a local engineer who just really took the bull by the horns on getting the thing built. Vendome did everything they could for us. We worked with local artisans to get everything in, and then May of 2017, we were having opening weekend, and these two guys, Alan and Old Dale Bishop, show up, and I think I remember going back to my wife Amy was working in the hearth kitchen. I think I remember going back and be like, these guys over there are really into this. I don't know who they are, but
they have a lot of questions.
Shout out to Dominique as well, because he's an interesting character for sure. He definitely is, and full of surprises.
Right. But yeah, Alan just wound up lending his. Just immediately just kind of became a part of things, lent his expertise, had me at the French Lick to train with him for a little while. And then we just started talking about all these crazy projects that we might do, including the 1830's Absinthe. And what I always like to point out about this too, that I didn't really get to in the film because it started happening in a different context. I didn't know I wasn't going to be working at Locust Grove by the beginning of 2021. So this was kind of really supposed to be the pilot of a number of interesting projects that we were going to do, right, digging up these obscure kind of distilled spirits. But as it turned out, this was the only one. And if there was going to be one, I'm glad it was this one.
There'll be more, just not through Locust Grove.
Right.
Yeah, well, just for you guys putting that up in the area, in Green Bay, we have a historical, it's like a little state park, but it's called Heritage Hill. And it basically pulls stuff from beginning in Wisconsin and Green Bay from like the early 1900s, and puts like a little village together of stuff that you can go and see and do. Nice. We don't have that, but I mean, let's be honest, there was someone with a still in almost every little city and community in America, and that's something, yes, I think is left out of that heritage that goes through. Is like, no, people were okay with this. Pretty much 60-70% of the people were doing it.
You're absolutely right, and that's a piece of information that I'm glad that you brought up too, because I'm going to comment on that real quick. So there is a Texas whiskey history book out now. I can't think of the name of it, but it's more of a distilling history book, but it's fantastic, and it touches on the Spanish. Right? People have this, and this is something that Brian and I'm sure would love to do in the future, getting out west somewhere. People didn't stop taking stills out west. It's not like they got to Indiana and Illinois and Missouri and said, "Well, this is as far as we got to go." Right. The Mormons actually distilled whiskey. They had what was called, they called almost every product they ever made Valley Tan, but there was Valley Tan whiskey. In Arizona, you had Taos Lightning. That history goes coast to coast, and the other states get forgotten about once you get past the Mississippi. So,
well, that's something I think. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm good. I'm done. I'm just rambling, man.
Oh no, that just kind of dovetail with I think the main point, one of the big points that we were trying to make with the Locust Grove Distillery was that this was a part of agriculture. So even before we had the smoking gun of the purchase of the still, it was fairly certain that there was a distillery there just because of the crops in the mill. There was grain, there was fruit, and there was the mill. And that's what we really try to draw people into, is this being part of the rhythm of the farm in the past. And it was really supposed to be an enticing way to draw people into the whole rhythm of the farm. But, after Prohibition, you have this idea that, well, somebody showed up in Kentucky and had a great recipe for bourbon, and that was that. But it's like no, it's like we try to take it back to this is an outgrowth of what's going on agriculturally.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that always interested me about Locust Grove. And I remember the first time I heard about it I was listening to NPR, and it was like, this weekend, the historic Locust Grove sort of thing. I'm like, oh, well, I know what I'm doing. Because I hadn't been to Mount Vernon yet, and I've always done, historic reenactments at Beck's Mill, etc. And I was like, okay, well, this is a legit thing. Let's go see who's involved, and maybe I can worm my way in somehow. And luckily it was Brian, and I love the guy because, when he was talking at first and I see him, I'm like, this fucking guy. Not truthfully.
Did you show up as your Hell's Half Acre version? Were you like the unruly side of town to Brian's nice side of town?
Well, I mean, I just dress like that anyways, generally, if I'm going somewhere. So I guess technically, yes, to some degree. But no, that was the thing with that was I was already doing the Hell's Half Acre thing, which is fun, but it has a shelf life, right? Before people get tired of it or before people drank too much or something silly's happened. So I already was in the mindset of, no, you can do these as legitimate historic reenactments. And so I just had to see one and to see Brian do it. I was like, I can definitely get involved in something like this if Brian needs help and then do some things on my own or whatever. So it very much so inspired me. And from the get-go, Brian and I got along immediately, and immediately started spitballing ideas. And I think within probably the third time we ever hung out, I brought up the absinthe thing. I was like, hey, I found this weird reference to absinthe and history of Dearborn and Switzerland counties. So that's actually split between Ohio and Indiana. It's a weird history book between those two counties. And that was the first reference we came across. And I was like, this is the 1830s. And like, I thought I'd be the first person in Indiana to ever make absinthe. And it was not the case. There were at least two guys that beat me to it. And not only did they beat me to it, they were doing it on scale to the extent that they actually hired coopers. So that tells me that they're shipping it downriver. The only place they could be shipping to is New Orleans. Where else is it going to go?
Yeah.
Right. So, especially in the 1830s, it's exciting.
Interesting too. Oh, sorry, Brian.
Oh no, just saying the neat thing about that too, about Alan bringing that up, was that we were focused on our core interpretation at Locust Grove. There was 1809 to 1822, Northern Kentucky. But it's like, I was kind of cognizant of we're the only one of these around this general area, so it's like we can be a vehicle for exploring these other things. And so it was neat. We've been so focused on what was going on in Kentucky in that time period. And then Alan brings this just, an hour's drive up the road, another piece of history, another angle on the whole distilling culture and how close that can be completely different. And of course, we had formed a relationship in the meantime with a historic site that was a farm in Switzerland County at the same time. And that's where Vinoge came in. So I thought that was just, to me, it was a very exciting angle to take with this thing. And we had circumstantial evidence that the Locust Grove distillery was still operating at that time too.
Yeah, one of the other exciting angles to it that we didn't touch on in the film, but I think is worthwhile to say as well, not only the Locust Grove Musée de Vinoge thing, but the fact that this is a two-state project. It's a Kentucky and an Indiana project. That's pretty special. Fucking dog scared the shit out of me, guys.
He's coming for you.
Right.
Sorry.
It's that chupacabra that lived in your yard.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't catch the dog come in. I just saw its tail, wagging. So I thought it was actually your wife that came in through the door, falling about a quarter of a second. Luckily, I didn't panic, but
I will say this. I would throw us off track one more time, but it did distract me from the fact that I just realized a weird biological fact. I'm sitting here sweating, and I'm like, man, it's hot in here. The part of my face that's sunburnt, not sweating. My head, good God, it's just fat problems.
right there with me.
I'll stop now. I'm sorry.
I have one offshoot question, just because we mentioned you saying that they had actually hired coopers back then and were probably shipping to New Orleans. You guys tried this probably just straight normal. Did you ever try a barrel aged version of this?
So we didn't put any in a barrel, but one of the protocols that I always use for absinthe is to actually add a little bit of usually wood cubes. I don't like chips. Okay. But there is a little wood influence in what we had created for sure. Okay. Not much, but just enough to give it some structure, which I think is what they were doing. I highly doubt
think it would have. Once it gets down there, I think it would be coming out, right? Like maybe a couple weeks at most, or a month that it would be in it. But with gin, that's enough to play with. Some gin's pretty good.
And I would say those barrels were probably pretty neutral. Like no more toast than what they would need to bend the staves would probably be about the extent of it. So we don't know that, but I can't find any evidence to the contrary in Europe at that time, other than occasionally by the 1830s they were certainly using what's happening? They were certainly using good Lord. They were certainly using neutral wine and brandy barrels to some degree by that time period for absinthe, which I still do. A lot of times I'll lay it down for a year in that. and then take it out, which is a sign of a very high quality absinthe. And they're particularly proud of that if they've colored it before it went into the barrel and it held onto its color. So kind of an interesting point.
And I could be wrong because I'm not super absinthe guy, but isn't it keeping its color over time part of the quality in general? Like if you have something and 6-8 months later it starts to hue off in a different direction, I would assume that's a sign of poorer quality or some stabilization in it, maybe.
So typically with absinthe, and they're not even terribly concerned about holding color for a prolonged period of time, but at least 9 months, sometimes up to 2 years. But it's also a mark of quality to get an absinthe that's in, say, a dark bottle that's been stored correctly, that will over time go that sort of autumn leaf color. And you can get some really wonderful oxidization during that process. It's rare to find those, though. There's not many producers doing that sort of thing anymore, but that was certainly looked upon with favor. Can also, if you find vintage absinthe samples of vert varieties, a lot of times they're going to have that dead leaf color to them. Of course, being over 100 years old, that would be to be expected. Whatever. Struggling.
You're all good.
Completely sober and still struggling, boys. I don't know what's going on.
It can still be a long day. That happens. So you guys, we basically got to the point where you guys kind of agreed to step forward. Now it was about 3 years from kind of conception to really, I'd say, kind of kickoff. No, but there is a lot of planning, and I don't know about Locust Grove, but let's just assume it's like a subdivision or like a community where you have to get everyone's approval, like a church, to do something, because I'm assuming there's a board, and a lot of times that's the way it is with places. So here's a great idea. We gotta get everyone's approval to move forward. I don't know if it went like that, but I'm assuming that's some of the steps in between A to B. Were there any setbacks that you guys ran into kind of in that time frame?
Well, I'll say really, as far as like planning, that was the easy part. I really kind of had license to do whatever we wanted to do within reason. And so I told my boss, it's like, hey, we want to do this. This thing sounds great. And she's like, great, do it.
I was just saying, I don't think we ever asked anybody for anything. It was just, this is what we're doing. And that was sort of the agreement that Brian and I had with me helping out down there too, was like, nope, this is our thing. We're just we're gonna go do it the way that we want to, and they'll just have to be happy about it.
But yeah, there was a lot of pieces to pull together. I mean, how many different gardens do the botanicals come from? Plus ordering them from other places. Yeah,
it's diverse as far as that goes, for sure. Musée de Vinoge, Locust Grove, my house. Did we use some stuff from your garden?
Yeah, there was stuff from our house too. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
So yeah, we all had these little pieces of all these botanicals that went into it.
Well, and the science or deduction of finding out what you assumed they'd use, especially when, like you said, they didn't have the grand worm, but they had the other ones. Easily thinking would go that realm. It's just neat to see where you need supplies, and here's something very similar. Like here's what they most likely played with without even blinking an eye. Here's a nice answer. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's like, shit, I don't know. Where did they get this from?
And as an amateur historian and writer, one of the most embarrassing moments of my life was at Musée de Vinoge, when I'm sitting there thinking about what botanicals could they have logically have grown, what botanicals would they have grown that would have been high quality enough to do this out of. And I'm ruling out things immediately, right? And I'm like, there's no way they would use this. There's no way they would use this. And then, of course, the lady from Musée de Vinoge is like, well, the river's right over there. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It is. It is. So, but I didn't think about that because, we have this sort of, and this is one of the things I think Brian and I addressed pretty well in the film, and in all the projects that we've ever worked on with addressing the agrarian sort of nature of all these sort of projects, is that, Brian and I have talked many times, none of these places, none of these estates, plantations, small farmsteads, none of them were self-sustainable ever. Right. They were good at one or two things, and then they traded for everything else that they needed. And I've always tried to come at like my farming as trying to be as self-sustainable as possible. And you get in that mindset of you're being self-sustainable. You're not really, because it's the same thing for me. But I get so sort of headstrong about that it doesn't occur to me, right? We have this idea that they were providing everything for themselves. So I didn't even take the river into consideration, and I should have, because it's an important part of obviously the settling of southern Indiana in particular, and Kentucky and Ohio as well. So, they certainly would have had access to agricultural products, not only from Pennsylvania and the East Coast, but also coming in from Europe. High quality botanicals certainly would have been very important at the time when you're dealing with tincturing alcohols and things of that nature that people are actually using for medicine.
Well, case in point, when the distillery was in operation at Locust Grove, the owner of Locust Grove was purchasing the spirits he preferred. So they were making whiskey and brandy out of their crops. He was purchasing rum and Madeira because that's what he liked to drink.
Speaking of rum and Madeira.
Hey, sorry I'm late. Can you guys start over?
Let me get my first drink back.
So we're part of the Mark Art Co-op, which is half Alan, half everybody else. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Cue the talking head mic video. Let's go. Let's get on with this.
That's where everybody takes a nap.
Off the top of his head.
Oh no, I have it written down.
Oh, I don't. I did not do a great job. I did okay today.
That's okay.
Theo got mentioned. Everyone
still
got
like
mentioned. Well, you say that.
One of the other interesting aspects of the whole project, and the Locust Grove project that Brian and I worked on as well, and I'm thankful to Brian for having me be a part of that over the years, is that we had this sort of agreement. We still have this agreement when we do anything together, that we don't cheat. There are no cheats whatsoever when we do this. So there's no exogenous enzymes. There's nothing modern. It's propagated yeast. We do it as old school as what we can. And we did potentially mess one up one time for sure, but that's going to happen. And that's something that we agreed to. Like, hey, there's no economic incentive here to have any of this work. This is really experimental. So if you're going to do it and you're going to call it historic, then let's do it historic, because these are the things that they would have gone through as well. And even the one that we messed up on, had we been there, had that been a full time for us, we could have saved it. We could have fixed it, and it would have been fine. So,
well, it's one of those things where you learn, though. You're learning as you go, because you didn't know about the problems that happened back then. That's part of the process. So I would expect some things to go wrong from time to time.
And the fact that it was only once was amazing. And that was the unique thing about this project, is that nobody's budget was rising or falling based on the spirits that we produced. And that's never the case. And so the whole point was learning. And so that's why it's like, yeah, we're not going to compromise. We're going to do it, and we're going to figure it out.
Well, and the beauty of it too is to be able to, with Locust Grove projects overall, including the absinthe, which there are still a couple of gallons of that exist, I believe. Being able to prove that with the equipment they had and the time and effort that they had to put into it and what they had, that you could still make a high quality beverage. And then having Brian to be able to back that up, not only, sit down and have a drink of the absinthe or various whiskeys or brandies that we may or may not have made over the years, but for Brian to be able to work with that in his cocktail program and show just how good that stuff can be and actually was. Because there is a perception out there that, the early stuff was bad. It's not true, guys. And anybody says that's full shit and doesn't understand their history. The vast majority of distillers in the United States were very well trained, and they came from families of distillers. Now, there were some bad players. Just like nowadays, they didn't stay in the business very long. They got ran out of the business very, very quickly. So using those traditional methods that they used, we've proven that you can make fantastic quality spirits using nothing but pot stills and no enzymes and complete inefficiency at fermentation. It's fine. It actually provides a very interesting flavor profile that is missing from modern spirits.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we always say that, for as much variety as bourbon has these days, there was a lot more variety in Kentucky whiskey at that time just because of the variance from batch to batch?
Absolutely.
It was a trade like anything else. And I mean, certain people are going to be better at the trade than others, but in general, when you have your trade, that is your place in the community. Even in the case of the enslaved distillers, that's your place. That's what you do, and that's your value. So yeah, you want to be the best at it.
Well, and some of it becomes commodity too, and this is something that we operated off of by adding small amounts of other grains here and there. But you're buying grain from your neighbor, or you're harvesting grain from your farm. Well, whoever used the wagon last, maybe there were some oats left over in that wagon or some corn left over in that wagon, and you go pick up some rye. So account for whatever that percentage is, right? They weren't really labeling mash bills, etc. They were just using what they had on hand most of the time. You don't really see very often. You don't see outlined mash bills that early in Kentucky and Indiana. You will find them in Pennsylvania and Virginia. But there definitely would have been some mixed grains ending up different places, right? And there's certainly more than enough evidence that weird things were happening, like things that Brian and I didn't get to do at Locust Grove, but we'll probably do in the future, potentially at Spring Mill, like pumpkin whiskey or pumpkin brandy.
Yeah.
We may or may not have gotten super drunk one time and done that in my backyard, but
that was awesome.
It was.
Allegedly.
Yeah. I just remember asking Kim to roast pumpkins and her being like, "What? What are you doing?"
So I have a question for you. Because obviously we're talking about historical spirits and stuff, but and sorry I missed some of the early things, but along with I mean, I don't want to say bourbon is bourbon, but people were making, well, actually, let me correct myself. See, this is what happens when you join in late. I know you can't call it bourbon unless it was made after, 1964, 65, whatever that was, to clearly define it. But people were making whiskey a certain way because it was brought over with them, with their family. So is there, at least as far as absinthe is concerned, number one, have you noticed regional things with people in the United States and how they do it? And number two, do you think it would be possible to trace with spirits the migration of people east to west, north to south, and the development of those spirits as they made the way across the continental, what we call the United States?
With most spirits, absolutely 100,000% yes. Now, as people intermingled, they would pick up other things. That's one of the things that's interesting about Southern Indiana, the Black Forest, is it's mostly German. But if you know what you're looking at and you know where the population's crossed over at, you'll actually find a lot of Welsh and a lot of Irish and a lot of Scottish stuff that gets intermingled. But yeah, you could trace. I can draw a straight line between what was happening in the Black Forest and what was happening in Pennsylvania. Like, it's the same thing is happening. They just adapted to a new region is what they did. With absinthe, that's a little harder because the ban was so long, and because absinthe never was, although it was a popular spirit, particularly in France, it never was hugely popular everywhere. And you really only have two traditional regions producing it. And one is a derivative of the other one. The Val di Traverse is the first, right? So if you were going to find something like that in the New World, there would be three places that you would look. So New Orleans, Cuba, and Brazil, because a lot of the absinthe distillers after the ban ended up in Cuba and Brazil. By all means, those Cuban absinthes were terrible, absolutely horrible. The Brazilian absinthes actually had a fairly good reputation, and they were actually made with Muscat grape as the base. In New Orleans, Absinthe was originally an absinthe until the ban, and then they switched out Grand Wormwood. So there's a little stylistic hints back towards those Edouard-style absinthes, for sure, in Absinthe. So, but it would be very hard to... Certainly the people that were in Switzerland County would have been mostly... influenced. I suspect they were actually influenced by two things: the Val di Traverse, which they weren't terribly far away from, but I also suspect there was probably a little Black Forest kind of, and maybe High Alps background there as well, right? Things like Genepi, maybe even something similar to Strega. I'm not convinced, because Indiana has a history of serving spirits as white spirits. For example, apple brandy and peach brandy locally with a little honey in them. It would not surprise me at all to learn that absinthe might have actually been a liqueur at that time. We don't have any references to that, but it wouldn't surprise me. So,
well, and a lot of it originally, kind of like some other drinks, was more of a deemed as a health drink.
Yes,
or a digestive helper and an aspect of taking it traditionally. So I can see how regionally you may, just because you'd have other plants available to you, but maybe there might be a stylistic version because you're trying to achieve a certain goal, maybe herbally or medicinally through it at one point.
No, 1,000,000%. And with the wormwood style drinks, you can take that straight back to ancient Egypt. Wormwood aromatized wines were very, very common. Of course, once you get into the Alps, and there's an interesting thing that happens where you sort of have this, and we touch on it in the movie. There's sort of a split between like traditional alchemy and what people might look at as green witchery or granny witchery. But certainly all those botanicals were understood to help with digestive issues. Sometimes they were known to help with sleep issues, particularly if you're using certain psychotropic compounds, such as chamomile, for example, in absinthe. Those were all things that were understood from both a folk perspective and a high alchemy perspective. And that was actually one of the things I thought was most interesting about this project. And I think Brian found some interest in this too. And we really hammered home like this granny witch idea, as well as how important women were to distilling in that particular region where absinthe came from. And it was related to basically what you might now think of as covens of witches, basically, which was interesting. But where that got interesting at, and I wish that we would have known that it was going to get that interesting when we did our showing and some of the events we did in Switzerland County. Some of that stuff still exists. Some of that folklore still exists in Switzerland County in a very strange, very odd way. And the people there love it, and they're more than happy to talk about it, and they're more than happy to admit that it exists and that it's a thing and it's part of their community. I don't know how many people are still practicing it, but it certainly exists as a folk memory in that community, which I thought was, that to me, that was exciting. That they were excited that we'd created this absinthe, that they cared that it came from Switzerland County, and that they fully understood the folklore behind all of that as well. So it was very surprising to me.
That was one of the most gratifying parts. And I keep on saying one of the most gratifying parts. There's a lot gratifying about it, but the project wasn't born in Switzerland County, but we eventually realized it's like, wow, we can actually draw Switzerland County into this, and everybody there was just so enthusiastic and so supportive and just so excited that we were there and trying to bring part of their history to life. They were obviously very invested in their history and all that, and it was nothing but a positive experience there when we showed up. Even when we were traipsing through a farm that we realized was not the property of the person who took us there.
Might have wanted to mention that up to us before we got out there. This was also not like an easy farm to get to either, boys. Like this was if you were just randomly there, you would swear you were in West Virginia. It was beautiful. It was also slightly terrifying. So
we're like, wait a minute, those are deer stands, and I don't think she owns this place.
Sure are an awful lot of no trespassing signs out here. Strangely enough.
But no, the land that you guys showed in the video by the river, you can easily see how people would want to settle in that area or, set up shop in that area because I have a couple spots in Wisconsin like this where you just get into the region and the region itself has like a calming effect. For whatever reason, there's 3 or 4 different reasons with a couple places in Wisconsin for some like that. But you notice when you get in that it has that there's a little different vibe to the whole thing. And just by looking at that area, it gives off a very relaxing kind of calming effect in that space.
That valley definitely had that, and Vivi in general kind of has that. Now, what's really interesting about that valley we were in on the Griffith Dickinson property, Griffith being one of the distillers, is that Brian and I weren't told until after we got the film done that was actually the original Swiss settlement was in that valley. It wasn't where Vivi is; it was actually in that valley is where everything started at. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And it makes more sense than where Vivi is currently located because you want that small creek that comes through there for mills and things of that nature. Not that you couldn't build one on the Ohio River, but it's a little more dangerous. Be nice to be away from that main thoroughfare and be close enough to still be able to ship everything by flatboat out. So it certainly made a lot of sense. But that whole place had a very interesting feeling to it. And I don't know if Brian feels this way or not. This might just be my stupid hippy dippy bullshit. But I felt like for whatever it was worth, the spirits that were there in Vivi appreciated that we were doing what we did. And I certainly felt that when I took the absinthe to the cemetery the 2 times and all that stuff to where we know John Detraw was buried at. We just don't know what plot or what actual, grave that he's in because it's unmarked. But that was one of the few times that a project has been finished and it felt like it was finished. It felt like it was done and it was done the right way, and what was meant to be done had been done. So
yeah. Well, it's like, my wife and me both, we've had about enough excitement as far as life goes. We're mostly looking for calm, but when it comes,
that's why you're my friend.
That's right. Right. Sidebar, just when me and Alan will be the first ones to get to Locust Grove for the distillery projects and all that. We got there about 8:30. We get to working and all that. And I hadn't thought about it, but we both have kind of like a similar approach to morning. And there was one morning we were getting everything scrubbed up and everything ready. He's like, I like working with you in the morning, Brian. And I was like, why's that? He's like, because you don't talk if there's nothing to say. Like that's how, I approach it that way too. But Vivi, it has a very calming effect, and it's like we will drop everything and go for a project up there. When we honestly we've backed off of a lot of things. I think even at one of the locations we were at, Alan, you were talking about some signs of maybe some spirits hanging around. I know I'd been amongst it as well many times overnight and everything else, but it never really occurred to me just because it always felt good and we felt welcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that even comes through in the film too. That's one of the undercurrents of that entire film is that there's more to this story than just the absinthe, right? There's the women behind it. There's the history of it. There's the tincturing, the alchemy, the granny witch stuff, and then just the area itself. And I think that certainly comes through, as well as the collaborative effort between, all of us to actually make that work. And also my favorite scene in that movie, just because it must be pointed out, it must always be pointed out, is when Brian's hair miraculously grows 18 inches.
Yeah, we filmed that over 3 years.
And it got filmed over 3 years. That was a question we didn't really answer earlier because of COVID, essentially. COVID shut down a lot of that stuff. I mean, we still went to the distillery and hung out and, wore scarves and all that fun stuff for sure. So, and mashed in. And so, but yeah, it definitely slowed us down on the project for sure. And that's what took so long. But it's so funny when we did the 2 screenings and that happens to Brian's hair all of a sudden. Both times it's completely silent. Everybody's watching the movie, and I'm like, "What happened to your head?"
Right.
Great.
Well, there was COVID. There was also, we had 4 partners, working together. None of whom this was the central point of, their mission. And so, to have we were dealing with COVID. We were dealing with trying to get all these 4 partners together who were totally on board with it. But it was a challenge and it was a passion project.
Well, it sounded like your drive down the highway was thrilling.
That was a nail biter. Yeah.
I left that time, and I'll tell you why I wasn't involved in that, because they left me to take the mash like 2 separate times, and one time it spilled over the hood of my truck, and I was like, nope, never again. It's never happening again. You're on your own from now on.
I've got a Ford Ranger, and I've got 100 gallons of mash in the bed of it, and it's like we weren't even off the property yet when it's like I realized the sloshing of it was just throwing me from side to side. But it's like, what? There's nowhere else to put it. We've got to get there somehow.
Danger Ranger.
Right.
Like you said, sometimes you're in it, and now this is just what we're doing.
That's what we're doing, yeah. So we drove very slowly down the highway, and luckily Aiden had stuck around late with me, and so he threw on his flashers and stuck behind me. Eventually got there.
Mm-hmm. So we also didn't cheat with any pumps either. All of that was done by hand with buckets, which is always a blast for sure.
And I always like how in the documentary how you guys took down kind of like the mashing process with temperatures and how you brought them down and when you're doing it and why you brought in, was it the molasses? What was the third thing you guys put in? I'm sorry, I'm blanking right now.
We went corn, wheat, malt.
Malt. It was malt,
Yeah.
and how that changed the overall kind of complexity or viscosity of it, maybe.
Yeah, the whole texture of it. Yeah, that's when it actually gets easy to row.
And kudos to Brian on that segment too. I should mention this. So Brian, this is Brian's first movie that he's actually made, full-length movie, right? And so we did not record when we actually made the mashes we originally made. So Brian actually had to record that separately. So that whole thing, that whole process, that was him filming as well as doing all of that process.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we went back later. Well, because that was the neat thing about it is, really the mashing process wasn't really any different than when we would mash a regular whiskey.
But it was a neat way to see you get there. And then you guys brought in how you brought in all the different herbs and put that. I found that interesting. Like, okay, how many runs if you have all the mash that you guys had with the herbs and botanicals inside that still, right? How many times do you add? How much do you have to add for alcohol, or do you just keep adding? I feel like that sack might have been enough to do a lot. Maybe I'm completely off, but it looked quite sizable for that little still.
Nope. So that's the interesting thing about absinthe, and that's where it differs from gin and aquavit or any of those things, is because absinthe has a background in tincturing. So the original absinthe that the Henriots were making in the mid 1700s, for example, it's not something you would have sat down and had more than a glass of, and you really would have only drank it if you were either wanting to go to sleep, had a stomach ache, or something of that nature, because it was 100% tinctured. It wasn't, the base was distilled, but the botanicals were just macerated. So that traditional tincturing methodology, it is 1-to-1. It is basically just enough alcohol to soak those botanicals the whole time. And then what you do is, because that's high proof ethanol, I think we did it 135, 140. When you get closer to Belle Epoque, you're closer to 170 proof. But you put all that in the still, and then you add water to it to lower the proof to 80 before you redistill it. Now, we did cheat on that a little bit, which was okay, because they probably cheated as well. Bearing in mind that they would have had most likely common pot stills. They would have had a very hard time running a common pot still with that amount of botanicals in there without scorching. So what we did was what we suspected that they did. So we actually macerated the botanicals in the alcohol for a couple of weeks instead of overnight. And then we strained the botanicals off and distilled it. And it still made a great quality absinthe. It was a little lighter style absinthe, and I'm very curious to run that absinthe again at some point with botanicals actually in the still and see what would happen. And we probably could have gotten away with that, but considering I was running at Spirits of French Lick and I was running it on 1 gallon still, it would have been an absolute nightmare, because I think it took me 3 days as it was to distill through what we had. So.
Well, that's what I thought with what it was. It was going to take a while to get through, and on that size, even going up to you said it was a gallon. I'm like, because that's what it looked like to test gin stills at Dancing Goat. So I figured going up to like even a 5 or a 10 gallon would be a significant jump in time and everything. And
if you don't grow some of those botanicals yourself, think about the cost of making a true absinthe as well, right? If for example, your smallest still might be a 250 gallon still, the cost on a run of absinthe is substantial. Now, luckily, if you make a run of absinthe, on a 250 gallon still, you're going to pull a lot off of it, because you're going to get back almost the same amount of proof gallons that you put in to start with. So it's going to last for a long time, but it is a substantial investment. I mean, on a home scale, maybe at one point in time, I did an 8 gallon run of absinthe. And if I hadn't had the botanicals already that I'd grown myself or bought over the years and they need to be used up, that was probably every bit of an $800 or $900 run of absinthe, without a doubt. So it's very, very expensive. But, the thing with absinthe is, how often are you going to, even if you're really into absinthe, how often are you going to sit down and blow through one bottle of one type of absinthe? I would say very rarely. So,
when you guys mentioned that you had at the end, you did some tastings or showings of the film.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just probably happened there, but would they ever think about doing that again, bringing in? Did you bring in other absinthes besides the one you guys made for people to try at the event? I guess would be my question.
Yes, most of what was tried was other absinthe. Honestly, because there's such a finite amount of what we actually made, and so there was a variety, and we kind of used that as an education point. And one of the events we did, they mostly wound up being not good interpretations.
Okay.
What he means to say is trash, is what he meant.
I like the honesty.
We used it to make a point.
Yes, we did. This is what absinthe is not supposed to be. This is.
I like No Job Alan.
Yeah, this is weird Soviet bloc GNS with a bunch of weird oils in it is what this is, and some bright green food coloring that I'm pretty sure they got from Lucky Charms. So, but now the other event we had some great absinthes at, and we did an event at Musée du Vinoge last fall as well, where I talked about absinthe, and I brought several types of absinthe to that, and there were some really legitimate absinthes in that lineup, including that purple absinthe that you guys have seen before.
That was amazing.
So,
yeah,
people definitely got to taste what absinthe should be.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's when you have it, it's one of those ones that I guess it's for me. It was kind of like gin, though. It has a certain core. It can vary more than what you would expect it to, because you're you're getting pitched to Green Fairy every goddamn time you hear about it. So you can, once you get to taste some of the better quality ones, you can really see a neat variance in what was put into it. And I'm going to be on the lower quality ones. That's kind of like it's a crapshoot of fucking flavors in that. And I don't like anise, and you know it, so that's going down a shithole to begin with for me sometimes.
You said anise and shithole.
I'm sorry. It's just but I set myself up and knocked them down all by myself. But
no, you're right though. There's major variations there, and that's one thing that I hope to see craft distillers get more into. First of all, craft distillers that actually want to learn how to make absinthe and make it proper. That's fantastic, right? You don't even need to make a vert to absinthe. There's no reason to. You know why? Jade does a fine job. And let Ted do that. He knows what he's doing, and he makes enough of them for everyone. Absinthe never got a chance to be Americanized, right? And when I say Americanized, I mean still use the fundamentals, but do some things to make it truly uniquely American. The purple absinthe being an example of that, and I have plans for that in the very near future. I have a yellow absinthe being another example of it. And the thing is, you can make two different absinthes that are literally night and day. You know, there's one that I make that is literally every root that you can imagine, because I want it to be as earthy and funky as what it can possibly be. There's another one that is a straight up dessert absinthe. There's another one that is much more floral, much more really herbal, leaning really hard into that sort of mint and horehound candy thing that I really enjoy, that medicinal sort of characteristic. So you can do all kinds of crazy things with absinthe. You're not going to ever sell a ton of it, for sure. That's never going to happen. But, I think every distiller who's really worth their salt should make an absinthe at some point in time, right? Even if it's just a 1 gallon batch, just to A, say they've done it, and B, see how much of a pain in the ass it really is. So
is there a frowned upon way to make absinthe?
I would say that there are a lot of things labeled absinthe. Okay, so first off, absinthe got a bad name when it was sort of deregulated, because there were a lot of those fake absinthes with the oils in them and just bad quality stuff. We sort of got over that and started to get over the hump and get back into quality absinthe. But you still have a lot of producers out there who don't understand the fundamentals of absinthe, right? And when I say that, you can't think of this as just a regular distilled product. You have to think of it from that tincturing background, or you're not doing it any kind of justice, right? It'd be the same as making a sugar shine and calling it a bourbon because you threw it in a barrel, right? It very much so would be the exact same sort of thing. So I would say that there are certain benchmarks of the quantity and quality of botanicals that if they are not there, you're not an absinthe. You might be absinthe adjacent, but you're not an absinthe. If you're not upwards of 150 to 200 grams per gallon of anise, for example, which is a lot, you're not an absinthe. So,
I just lost a spider monkey.
Yeah, and I know that comes off sounding snobby, but it's also that is a thing. I'm all about creativity and distilling, obviously, and that's what I do. But I will say this: there was something to there being, the different trade guilds that there were in England, and the fact that there was a time when if you were a part of a trade guild, you were held to a standard, right? And if you weren't going to toe the line on that standard, they were going to let everybody know, and then they were going to come after you. And I think it should be that way, truthfully.
I agree. Holy cow. I didn't even realize what time it is. All of a sudden, we're an hour into a show, and I didn't blink an eye. That's okay.
Did you blink your anus? I mean, anus?
Just that one time real tight, and we started talking about that stuff.
Really just 12-year-olds. I mean, there's no way around it. It just is what it is.
It only ever gets funny.
I grew up with Leslie Nielsen, so yeah.
So I should also we should also say here that the goal is, so we now actually have what we believe to be a derivative of the Griffith Dickinson yeast that we actually captured from that piece of property.
Right.
And we do intend, or at least have plans to reproduce that absinthe in the future at Spring Mill State Park. Mm-hmm. So
that's what I was going to say. Were you ever kind of with doing that? Were you guys ever thinking of doing a project like at Spring Mills where you did something where it benefits the park but brings people in? And I know one you did was mostly whiskey and stuff, but this could almost be its own offset booth or something to it, or own day to it.
100%. And I think the goal at Daisy Spring Mill will be not only to represent the history of Daisy Spring Mill and the Black Forest, but also Indiana in general. So if it happened in Indiana historically, there's no reason why it can't happen at Daisy Spring Mill, right? There's no reason whatsoever, especially it being a state park, right? All my arguments for Southern Indiana to succeed being what they are, I will still allow Northern Indiana to participate.
Well, it's one of those things too. It's like where it's, there's not a lot of these facilities around, and so you kind of get to be the hub of these kinds of experiments. There's not a whole lot of places where it can really happen.
Yes, yeah, and that was the beauty of Locust Grove. So think about how unique and how cool that is that even existed, right? That anybody could, if they wanted. The bourbon tourism being what it is, but if somebody really wanted a grand overview of distilling in Louisville, Kentucky historically, and there is some marketing here, obviously, but if you wanted a grand overview, where else could you go than Louisville, Kentucky, where you could go to Locust Grove and see it done as it was in the early days, go right down the road to Copper and Kings, experience the brandy thing, and then right down the road to the Evan Williams experience the bourbon thing.
Yeah,
there's that's a very unique situation that all of those sites would be within that distance of one another and in the same city for sure. So
for as much historical spirits making there's not as much stuff that harkens back to what Locust Grove does, which I almost would think you would see in some more experiences if you're pitching the past from wherever as part of it. Maybe you don't have the land. I get it. Things change hands, but you can come up with part of your, I'm going to be a dick, your $45 and $150 million experience can play a little part of your actual past. So I find that what you did there is something great because it touches on it for everybody, where some people could be using it for their own marketing tactics, not just for historical things.
Yeah.
They'd be using it in a different way. It's a little purer sense of what it is. But yeah, I don't know how some of these other people don't tap into something similar.
And the sad thing is, unless something's changed, it's not something that most of those companies are interested in. So one of the great disappointments of the past 10 years of my career was that I worked with a wonderful guy and his wife who were members of the Brown-Forman family who lived on Harrods Creek. And they had laid out plans to actually build a small, very small craft distillery on old Brown family property. And in no way would this have competed with Brown-Forman in any way, shape, or form. The guy was going to keep his Brown-Forman job. But unfortunately, the company shut it down. And it was very much so going to be coming from that historic perspective of the Brown-Forman family, including some legends of them moonshining during Prohibition on Harrods Creek, etc. And it got shut down. So
I think there's a neat crossover that could be done. I think of when you Jameson and their massive scale, but then they have their small distillery they built. It's their good distillery. All their really good. It's true. All their really good products come out of there. I'm not being a dick. They filter out the metallic.
Hey, a little bit.
A little. I am. But it's true. It's very true. Because when I had those spirits, I was like, holy shit, this is Jameson? Like the confused.
Yeah.
Why? My question: why do you make the other stuff? But
because they sell a lot of it.
Because I know.
Come
Well,
on.
I would say too.
Yeah.
I don't mean to speak out of turn here. Well, first of all, it keeps on not coming up, so I do want to acknowledge how much Alan advanced our interpretation at the Locust Grove Distillery. There was a lot of things that we understood and a lot of things we did that we would not have done had he not shown up and just given his knowledge and his time and training, for me and all that. But also on that note too, it's especially after really digging into the roots of Kentucky whiskey and all that, and as a Kentuckian who loves being a Kentuckian, it's like I've more and more taken umbrage with these companies turning our state into a Disneyland version of itself. There's nothing authentic left to it. Those of us who actually live around here, we have to fight to afford houses, in our region, stuff like that. And I hope the day comes when bourbon is a working man's drink again. When we can just get back to the honest.
Well, and Brian, you and I have talked about that several times, but I think there are three shining lights out there potentially for how things could be done right now. One of them was already priced high anyways, and that's Colorado, right? Mm-hmm. But Colorado and Texas are definitely on the list. And I think Pennsylvania is really where you can see some cool stuff happen.
There is some really neat stuff happening.
And because the people there even care about the modern distilleries in Pennsylvania. Yeah. And they talk about them in a way that you don't hear people in Kentucky talk about their distilleries.
Yeah.
At all, in any way, shape, or form. Now, Beam has got their fingers in some of that stuff out there, and so that's a little concerning, obviously. And as rye grows, I'm sure Beam will continue to invest money there. It could be a good thing, but I sure hope Pennsylvania does not go the direction that Kentucky has.
I do too.
Kentucky's got that whole weird California thing going on that really, I don't even know how that they think that that's going to work. It's not as though Kentucky has the weather to make that a sustainable venture in the first place. The weather is a big part of what makes California tick in that way. So same for Colorado. It's just on the opposite side. It's cold. So
right.
And with Colorado, it gets cold and it might, like in Denver, it might snow, but a lot of times a couple days later, it's almost non-existent on the roads. And
exactly.
The problem doesn't linger as it does in the north here. Like fucking 9 months.
It's not a problem until that snow melts and they start finding the bodies.
That's another new Netflix special.
So after you guys did all this, well, of course, I'm sure some people caught wind that you were doing it while you're making it. But in that time and since then, have you had anyone come forward and say, hey, we found evidence of this in our area, no one's doing it, trying to ask for advice or anything like that?
Not on my end.
Mm-hmm.
You can pass. Right? I feel like there was a pass. I think someone just.
I thought you were unemployed and could talk. No, okay.
I mean, other than people bringing 15 generation recipes across the Atlantic with them, I can't imagine that ever happening. But Yeah, I don't know. There's plenty of that out there, right? It's a whole lot easier, I feel, sometimes for people just to latch on to other people's stories and run with them than it is to come up with something of their own accord. And we've latched onto somebody's story, but guess what? It was a story from the 1830s that nobody else was telling, nobody else had intentions of telling until we did it. So,
was there anything like regionally, like even another historical group, some other places said, "Oh, hey, we know that they grew wormwood in this area, so what do you think?"
Not that I know of. I mean, there would certainly seem to be a little bit of that going on in New Orleans right now. At least in terms of trying to reclaim that heritage. It's certainly there for sure. Like I can't say it right. Alterior V, whatever it is. And he's growing his own wormwood, etc. And New Orleans has a legitimate absinthe history, not only in terms of the bars, but there were 3 absinthe distilleries in New Orleans. So they should certainly try to reclaim that. And I think, Jim Martin from Key West is certainly trying to get involved in that as well, with launching Voodoo Fairy, which is a purple absinthe that I developed for him. But also, just leaning into that history of absinthe production there. So,
well, in both the areas you mentioned, that's what they're doing. They have a little bit of something, a little bit of history, and they're not afraid to bank into it. And how did someone not do absinthe in Key West for however? I mean,
right. The first time I went to Key West,
it's one of those business deals. It's like, oh, this seems like easy, even as it's shitty. We come out ahead,
Well, I will tell you,
I just mean tourist people coming through to buy it. That's the way a business would think. Would be like, even if it's not so good, we're going to sell it to tourists, and we'll be okay, and we'll get past it. Now, if you put out a good product, that's a whole different thing. But how do you not lean into an area like that? Same thing with New Orleans. Like, it's almost a nightlife thing. I'm like, that's something that's one of those drinks I would say is ingrained in the culture there.
It's also a go out and get weird sort of thing, right? Well, and that's what those 2 towns are, right? It's go out and get fucking weird, for sure. So it fits, right? And I don't just mean go out and get weird, like, you're going to go out and get trash or whatever. That's a big part of it, obviously, and whatever. But also the history of that, right? The Absinthe House. Aleister Crowley drank absinthe at the Absinthe House. Doesn't get much weirder than Aleister Crowley in New Orleans drinking absinthe at the Absinthe House. Yeah, if I was in New Orleans, I would lean all the way the fuck into that story for sure. I would release the Lemic absinthe, and it would be a thing. I would lean as hard into that as I possibly could.
Well, going back to a point too, I think that Patrick or somebody was asking about as far as did we run into anybody else saying that they had a piece of this? Correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, but didn't this appear to just be a blip in the 1830s period?
Yeah, it's not talked about after the 1830s at all.
It's gone by the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
I think it was because, even by the 1830s, the people that were there in Switzerland County, you start to, although there is some of that identity still there, especially in the high strangeness and the folklore, generations lose that. You know what I mean? You talk to somebody from even like Jasper, Indiana, who, their family came over in the mid-1850s as staunch German Catholics. Talk to the generations of them now, that's not necessarily, going to be the case. And the same thing is true of food. People lose their taste for those things, as generations go on, it just changes over time. And so much changes there between the 1830s and the 1850s. Leading into industrialization, that it'd be pretty easy to start to forget who.
I was gonna say, when did the brandy kind of take off in that area? Was it similar time frame when it kind of was a transitioning effect? I would almost suspect like this became more of the cash crop.
Well, the brandy is interesting because it does continue long after the absinthe. It continues up until at least, probably up until Prohibition, but certainly into the 1890s. As a sort of byproduct of Catawba grape production and sparkling wine production. In fact, they basically, you could think of some of the distilleries that remained in Switzerland County as sort of feeding into the wider Cincinnati area with their brandy distillation. Both Catawba brandy and blackberry brandy were both huge things. And that whole area between Lawrenceburg and Vevey, there were actually not just obviously the distilleries you guys know, Seagram's and all of that stuff, but there were a lot of small distilleries there, and a lot of those small distilleries were primarily fruit brandy and grape brandy distilleries that made large amounts of Catawba brandy for sure. The other thing that Switzerland County made that Brian and I thought was interesting that we would like to do at some point in time is persimmon brandy. That was a huge thing. So I have distilled that in the past and it did not turn out well, but I know a few things now that I didn't know then. So I'd be willing to try it again. But that seemed to be what was popular amongst the locals to drink was persimmon brandy.
Wow.
So,
I've had a cordial. I would be intrigued to see how brandy played out because the less sugariness to it, I think would be kind of neat. Shifting away from a cordial into that would be neat.
Low alcohol if you don't capitalize for sure. So it's only gonna be maybe 4 or 5% alcohol wine to start with. So very low yield off the still. But I think there's some. When I made it the last time, it was very. One time it was very neutral and one time it was very tannic. And I think that might have actually been the case. I think maybe they were looking for something light that, if you're out working in the fields or something that you can drink and it's not just going to kill you. Right. So that might've been what they were after. So I know that certainly seems to be the case with peach brandy. Peach brandy does not taste like what people think peach brandy tastes like. It's typically pretty light, maybe a little buttery, but it was something that you could drink while you were doing farm work or whatever, and it's not gonna weigh you down too heavy. So
everyone gets a glass at noon.
That's right.
No, that stuff happened. I farmers in my family.
Send the youngest boy down to the still house and have him come back with a bucket. That was the thing. That was the youngest kid's job was to go to the distillery and keep whiskey on hand for all the farm hands. So
that was similar to my grandma's job growing up. Her job was to go to the tavern with a bucket to bring back beer. And the thing she would do is she would sip all the foam off of the back.
This beer sucks. Has no structure, no head whatsoever.
The first weddling.
No, it was that side, but she was not a weddle yet.
Oh, it all starts someplace,
Apparently that was it. Apparently.
So Brian and I have talked about another project though, and I know he and I are both in the middle of doing a whole bunch of things right now. But we have talked about potentially doing a maple syrup stone beer project. So sort of taking the Groot stone beer thing, turning that into a historic documentary along with tapping maple trees and using maple to do that at Vinoge. So
there's a friend in Crawford County just right next door. Well, not quite next door, but he's got a great maple sugaring house.
That's right. I forgot your buddy. Yeah, your buddy's right there. He's in Crawford. That's what.
Yep,
you said, right?
Crawford. Yeah.
Convenient.
Interesting. maybe less people raising eyebrows over brewing beer than making spirits too.
Oh, it would still be distilling. We would still distill it for sure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm like, you're still going the next step afterwards. So what's going in it again? Because I'm finding this interesting.
So we would definitely focus heavily on the maple syrup production, right? I think that's where it would start at. But then after that, looking at the, Brian and I have never sort of documented some of the stuff that was happening in, the UK very early on, right? So the Groot idea, so basically ales. So before you have hops being sort of regulated to go into beer, you were using various different botanicals to flavor your beer with. But there's an interesting historical story to be told there about the Gaels and the Gauls. And the Gaels basically, having the knowledge of the monasteries, understanding distillation, they're basically making stone beers, trying to imitate brandy by distilling it. And then the Gauls, which that word is interesting because it really just means those other people, those red-haired people.
Yeah.
They were making the same kind of beers and they were seeing these guys, what the hell is that weird machine that they have that's, so it wasn't much of a step for them to get into the art of distillation. So I think there's a couple different stories to be told there. There's that story of maple syruping. There's a story from the UK with the stone beers, the Groots, and then there's the modern craft sort of aspect of why would you not sort of take all of these inspirational things and put them together into a unique product that is representative of the local area. So use local botanicals, use local grains, use local maple syrup, go through the whole thing.
It's just a weird spin because I'm a few drinks in at this point, and you're using maple syrup. Has anyone ever used that as kind of like a rum base, like the sugars? I'm intrigued as to how that would turn out in such a project rather than leaning whiskey going rummy.
So yes, that's certainly happened. But also shout out to somebody here that you guys should check out and maybe even have on the show at some point. I'm sure he'd be willing to come on. Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, who came out with the Tennessee Whiskey book. He touches on the earliest spirit he could prove being distilled in Tennessee was essentially rum, because there was a connection back east for sugar. And when they ran out of that sugar, they certainly turned towards maple syrup to make continental rum in Tennessee. So, it's it makes a very good spirit. Even the when you're boiling maple syrup, because we make maple syrup too, you have a lot of stuff that foams at the top. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you have is if you don't filter that maple syrup, you'll have what's called sugar sand that sinks to the bottom of the bottle, and most producers will pull that off. So if you get, when I was doing home distilling on a very large scale long ago, we had Amish friends who would make literally hundreds of gallons of maple syrup, and they would have 3 or 4 55-gallon barrels of that sugar sand. So you could take a quarter of that barrel, put it into a new barrel, add water to it, and you'd end up with like a 1090 mash bill, which is fairly high, and make rum out of that. And it would, honestly, I like it better than I like sugarcane rum, but that's just so.
I was just thinking it lands somewhere for me between, like you said, sugarcane and like a molasses with a different kind of hit. So I was just thinking it might be mid-grady in that. So
yeah, right. I like that technical term. That's a good one. Hello.
Hey, Penny.
Everybody says
Penny.
hello.
Hey,
Penny.
Good night. Love you. Shut the door. Thank you. Okay.
Well, in the 18th century, wasn't rum being made in New England, but it was considered inferior to Jamaica? Was that a maple sugar rum?
No, that was part of triangle trade and all.
Okay, gotcha.
Stuff. So, but by the time that molasses got there, it was always fairly low grade molasses. It was bulk. It had set in the hot sun, in a ship. Everything that could possibly go wrong with it was wrong with it.
Right.
Even though the sugar's high enough that it's not, going to spoil. You can imagine the insects and things of that nature that would have gotten into it over time before it ever made it. And honestly, it had a fairly decent reputation for what it was. Some of that nastiness is no different than some of the things that you might do to otherwise build esters and flavors with a dunder pit or a muck pit or whatever. So, probably not very appetizing if you ever saw it, but
hey, you don't want to know how the sausage is made.
No. Or the McNuggets.
Good Lord, no.
God, no. That's just
or the McRib.
Ew.
You shut your whore mouth, Mike.
Hey, since we're talking about absinthe.
Right.
But I don't know. I was just happy you guys got a chance to come on, because when we saw this project where it works with spirits, which is fantastic, but I love the way that you guys, like I said, went back and you kind of pulled the investigating part to the forefront of the movie. Like I said, you pulled the people who had some of the knowledge to the forefront to give their 2 cents. Honestly, shine the light on it, the people who deserve it, because I was a historian. I love it. I love doing research. So many times the person that knows stuff or is pivotal is just glossed over or forgotten about, or, that like you never knew that tiny guy with 5 sentences was the most important part of the whole weekend or a trip or something that set the tone for something.
Well, I appreciate that.
Kudos to Brian on that one more time as well, too, because, again, this is his first movie, but I can tell you that I know for a fact that there was a lot of footage that Brian was smart enough to cut out that he knew was not necessary. And he does a great job of exactly what you're talking about with this movie. He does a great job of making it about the people and about the place and about the time. And that was the relevant part of it, as well as making it about the partners that worked on it. So
it proves a historical connection when you're watching. It's like, here we're brought back this recipe. Great. How did you get there? How do I believe you?
It's like, let's take you through the entire process of the whole thing. Let's really give you a deep look that you've never seen before. So hopefully we got that done.
Now, there was a whole day worth of filming at Vinoge that didn't make it into the movie that Brian now owes me a steak dinner for, but that's a separate issue.
Well, that's the thing. It's like there's enough extra footage. I can do all these like special cuts.
I'll never have to do another movie again.
Right. I was trying to get it down to 45 minutes, and it just wouldn't go.
From director Brian Cushing, the Ridley Scott of distilling documentaries.
5-hour absinthe epic.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's the 1830 Alan Bishop experience.
Re-released to rentable theaters only for one night.
I think you can do that. You can get a theater in Green Bay. It's not that expensive.
Yeah.
And we can do this.
$1 adult theaters.
No. I thought they shut those down. Like
the dirty side of absinthe.
We got that adult video store on 9th Street here in Louisville.
Special live broadcast of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything.
Okay, we get to go to that bar, the Red Bar,
Vampire Bar. Yes.
Yeah. If we can go there for like a live during it, I would do that.
Well, now you could put Winnie the Pooh and Mickey Mouse in it too. So, I mean, if you're going to really go nuts.
Why are they free? Can you use their copyright?
Yeah, Winnie the Pooh's in public domain, and so is early Mickey Mouse.
Oh, goodness.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, all the things
there's already been a Winnie the Pooh slasher movie, and there's been a Mickey one too.
If only there was a Florida distillery that was making absinthe.
Weird. Oh, that would be hilarious if they did that.
that has
Voodoo Mouse.
Voodoo Mouse.
Okay, I am all behind that because there was like the Halloween version of Mickey at one point from back in the day. That's a real thing.
Yeah, and Emily's correct. It is just Steamboat Willie, but I mean, come on.
Steamboat Willie absinthe.
Theft of his partner and his anti-Semitism aside, yes. Which we'll get into that. But one thing that I think is really important to bring up with you guys doing this type of documentary on it, it's really important for people to see things like this instead of, maybe they're on a point in their drinking journey or their, I don't want to say spirits journey, but that's what it is. They're on their point that they want to learn more. Okay. Now what's going to get them more interested in something else and maybe give them an appreciation for something that they waved off. Or make them even go back and say, "Oh wow, there's this." I never gave gin a chance. I never gave some of these other things a chance. Because most of the bourbon documentaries are, especially newer ones. I mean, a lot of them. I think they're a little propaganda. Which is it's not to say they're not good, but there's a little,
Hollywood touched it.
Kind of like watching a World War II movie about that was made in early Hollywood and calling that a documentary. It's really not, but it's but I think it's really important for people to watch stuff like this and for people like you guys to make them because it is it's part of world history. It's certainly part of American history, but regionally it's definitely big. But as far as like the spirits world, understanding why people made it, and maybe figuring out why they stopped, which would be another interesting thing. Why did they quit?
That would be something interesting to delve deeper into. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm always, anytime Brian wants to do one of these projects, I'm always up for it, and I'm always willing to throw ideas and I work with Brian in a heartbeat, man. I mean, it took us 3 years with COVID, but I'm throw out another little diss here for DJ Henderson. DJ started 2 years before Brian on his documentary, and he still doesn't have it done.
It took me forever, but it's done.
It's going to be, that documentary is going to be amazing when he gets it done after I die and plays it at my funeral. It's going to be phenomenal.
It's all that late night editing right before. DJ's like, you should see what I had to cut out.
Trying to keep a 30-year-old computer running.
Right. Yep. No, I think that this is going to be part of what Brian's work in general, whether it's Victorian ballroom, the history with that, teaching people how to do the cocktail thing, or even the punches. The punches in particular are important because they're a little easier for people to get into and do of their own accord. But also with his filmmaking, that stuff is what's going to help the next wave of craft distillers and the craft distillers that make it through the fallout that has already begun. So that authenticity and that history will help craft distillers tremendously. And it's something that, I'm sorry, but the big guys can't do.
Well, it was your knowledge and your ingenuity that made it happen. So,
thanks, man.
Yeah, you brought it to the table.
Yeah. Well, we got plenty more to do for sure.
Yep.
There's plenty more to do. I'm sure we'll be doing plenty more of it. Absolutely. So I'm not going to get into movie making anytime soon because I saw how much of a bitch it was for you. So
it was difficult. I was surprised.
Just going to have 3.5 podcasts.
That's right. Yes, and guest on a lot of them as well. That's
that was the half, right?
My computer won't run video, so I'm done with adding new hobbies for a minute. So
that's fair.
No, but like I was saying, we appreciate the both of you coming on and taking interest in the projects and connecting the historical dots for people, because that's something that is not done enough anymore in general. People just gloss over history just altogether. But like you said, there's not enough people that will go back and peel through manuscripts or read things, or like Todd Leopold did. Like I said, go back, read, look, research. This pulls some of that to the front for people and shows them that there is an opportunity to do things similar, maybe in their region. I totally don't know how some places aren't. If I had a distillery, I'd be trying to do something that connected to the past and it could be used for helping the future. So,
well, thank you guys for featuring the project and kind of giving us the platform and all that. We really appreciate that.
I'm going to throw out another little absinthe thing here, and I can't make any announcements on it whatsoever yet, but keep an eye on what Jim Martin's going to be doing and trying to do, because there might be some cool. We mentioned
Mickey Mouse-esque.
No, but we did mention a certain island that had a history of absinthe production. So Jim's got big ideas, and I think he can pull them off. So we'll see.
Excellent. Well, it'd be good to talk to him too, coming up about that, because it's a neat region that, like we said, that I didn't think someone had leaned into enough in there to take advantage of it. So
yeah, and he's done a great job with it with the Death in the Afternoon, and I know, I think if anybody can turn that into a Key West thing, he's the one that can do it. There come a day where it might almost be like that's the first thing you do when you go to Key West is sit down and have an absinthe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Better than have an absinthe and watch the world die.
Just watch it fly by too. But yeah, the way it's looking now, I'm not going to argue anything at the moment. So, but yeah, like we said, thank you guys for coming on. We appreciate it a great deal, and just what you do in general, and basically your I appreciate your personalities because of your appreciation of history, And it's not lip service, because let me tell you, you can tell when stuff is lip service, and then I turn away instantaneously. I'm sorry. Being in PR and marketing, as soon as you start hearing words, I'm like fluff, and I just wander off.
We appreciate you.
We know you won't kiss Anise.
Yeah.
No, not close. No, I don't. But I'm not going down that path. We're gonna leave here now. So
I like unemployed Alan too, because he doesn't have a marketing person.
They're the worst.
There's no reins on Alan.
It's like an air raid siren going off in your ear all day long.
So remember to stop out next Monday. Next Monday we'll be having another show. Oh, that's right. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah.
We
were just gonna make sure to bring this up before we get off there. Emily could probably be much better about explaining this in the chat, but Cheech Ardolino, who has moderated for a lot of the YouTube channels, has his own YouTube channel and stuff, has been into a car accident, and wouldn't you know, hospital stays and medical bills are expensive. So there's a GoFundMe for him. Every little bit helps. He's been on here. He's kicked in with a lot of people's stuff. So please go and check that out. You can see it. I think I'll put it in the chat unless Emily's already doing that. But yeah, if you can, would appreciate it.
Yeah, we go from. Oh, and Pooh has killed me. That's because Pooh has stared at Piglet in a wrong way for a long time.
Oh, he'd make you kill.
That's just, I feel like.
And Eeyore, everyone's tired of Eeyore.
You don't want to eat Eeyore though. Eeyore just does not look like, he looks like old, like beat up, just worn down meat. Piglet's like some weird bacon and cutlet. There's a terrible movie. There's Rabbit and Tiger. I don't know. Tigger's the only one that gets away.
Rabbit's a pain in the ass.
What do you think the percentage of Eeyore tattoos on 80s tramps at Def Leppard concerts is? I'd say it's pretty high.
It's the best part. You gotta carry that to the nursing home.
Never seen Eeyore look so sad.
Depends on where Eeyore's at.
Yeah. Oh, the Junkies are doing a stream for Cheech tomorrow evening. So stop over at Bourbon Junkies as well. There you can help out there. Besides just to go for me. So, all right. Like I said.
Amen. See Brian over there being all shy, not like contributing to this conversation whatsoever, and Amy's like, "Watch this shit."
I do remember a few people that Kathy had it. Yeah, you're right. Tigger's adventurous. Yeah. But look at that. Thank you guys for coming on. We really appreciate it. We hope you guys do more stuff like this in the future, and even just conceptually talking about projects like this. Hell, I'd love to have you on to talk about that, because just neat historical projects. I don't know. Sometimes I don't feel like everyone else's brains are firing on all cylinders with like neat, complex things that you could be doing. And this is a really neat project, and I hope more people see it, kind of pick up the mantle of it, and kind of play down their alley doing it in their area. So,
well, thank you.
You guys have a wonderful night. Remember, it's not. Oh, sorry.
I was just saying, you too. Have a wonderful night.
Yeah. Remember, it's not the size of the den that matters. It's the love of whiskey. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
See ya.